Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Soma for having us here and helping us or supporting us for this project that we're working on right now here in Mexico City. And I'd like to thank, of course, Joshua Cohn for being a friend and being so supportive, and of course, Barbara and Laura and Merrick, of course, because they've been helping us a lot. But I just want to immediately move over to Jun Yang, who was originally born in China but was raised in Vienna most of his until his adult life. But now he divides his time between Japan, Taipei, and Vienna. So here's Jun Yang.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm sorry, I have a very sore throat. I think I have some tequila worm still in my throat stuck, so please apologize. Well, we thought the way we give this talk today was that I will introduce approximately for half an hour 3 projects. I was interested in, therefore, a different film. I liked references of films. And in this case, it was Alain René's Hiroshima Mon Amour film in the 50s. A very interesting example of Nouvelle Vague, and a film about surrealism and the layers of how these two people in love deal with guilt and the history. So I kind of restaged it. You can see it's also two people in love, and they move through Hiroshima, and there are certain scenes that are one-to-one as Alain René filmed it. But in the film, I created a different ending. I created an ending where the female character goes to Jaipur and looks at Janta Manta, one of the biggest built observatories about the sundial, the moon, and all these things. So because of that, the film was shown in an installation where there is a staircase and there is a sundial and has these objects with fake shadows that represent something of a moment within in this, like here is a painting of de Chirico. I was interested in the relationship of de Chirico's surrealism and Alain René's surrealism, and that was then built into a space. So there was the exhibition in the Mori, and this is this year at Art Sonje in Seoul. And then I was invited to do an exhibition at the MAC in Los Angeles. And the exhibition premise was to do a dialogue exhibition. The MAC is an arts center that is connected to the Austrian history and architect. So I thought, as I knew Bruce and his work, I thought it could be interesting to invite Bruce. I was interested, it's a film about the Japanese drop of American drop of nuclear bomb, where after, after the Second World War and after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese community were put into camps, and Japan was occupied by America. So I thought this would be interesting, and in some of this, many of his work, there is this political and historical level to it. So I thought it could be an interesting situation to do that. So, that's Bruce, yeah. So that's, but I approached Bruce and I said I would like to not show off any of his films, but I would like to show his sculptures and photographs. But I would like to also design the space, so it goes in accordance to the whole architecture that was built for the film and in the setting of these observatories and these objects that try to think about how to define sort of like the universe. It was always the stereotype of a Chinese restaurant in that time. And it was very much connected to how Chinese restaurants looked like in the 80s and 90s in Europe, where I grew up. And with the background that my parents were the founders of some of the earliest Chinese restaurants in the 70s and 80s. So, in fact, this is a ceiling that my father built in the 80s. The new owners didn't like it. They took it down, put it in a cellar, and I bought all the ceilings that my father built. But I was interested in this cliche, in this stereotype of what is an image of Chinese. I walked through Mexico City, and we researched some Chinese restaurants, and I noticed each of them, every single one, it doesn't matter how nice or ugly or simple they were, they had all red lanterns. All of them, not a single. So even if it looked like, if they would take it down, it would be a tacos place. But once they put it up, oh, Chinese restaurant, let's go. Buffet, let's go, yeah, let's eat. So I thought it was that was a very interesting, and also to see that here, I mean, in 2018, I was quite surprised. But anyway, so I produced this work, and it's a piece that is very silent. There's a voiceover. It uses the aesthetic of VHS of the time that I grew up with in the 80s, 90s. We had a VHS, and this is the aesthetic of it: 4:9, bad color, and so on. So after that piece in 2001, when we finished the work, as my brother was in Vienna, and he was sitting at we shared a lot of time. We discussed if we talk about these stereotypes, and even if I analyze them in my videos as stereotypes and question them or show something else, our question was then, how would a real restaurant look like? And as all the restaurants, not a single one not, looked at like this, and Chinese was very defined. People couldn't spell R, and in every restaurant there were only Chinese people working, and so on, etc., etc. The dishes looked the same, and blah, blah, blah. So we said, how would a real Chinese restaurant look like? So we decided to open a Chinese restaurant. I mean, it was a lot of effort. We built, and I did the entire architecture, and the name. We worked with a team. And we spent more than a year researching food, traveling to China, and working on the whole prototype of this restaurant. The restaurant looks maybe today like a very contemporary restaurant, but for Austria in 2002, it was quite a shock, let me say. This is how the restaurant looked like today, sorry, yeah. So it's a restaurant. I will not go too much into the architecture, but we try to analyze all the Chineseness. We started to name it ramen, which nobody could really spell, or to the cliche of these, with a tapestry of the pattern of something Chinese, but nobody could see it because it was color in color. We took the red color as not as lanterns, but to create a canopy. We opened an open kitchen in the restaurant. At that time in Vienna, nobody did, and it was very weird, and we had only noodles there to serve, just a middle of noodle place, and so on, and we took it into the fullest. But then there was a door, not a speakeasy door, but like a staircase going down, and downstairs was a bar, and we thought in this bar we could create a nice bar, and we made it into the most kitschy Chinese restaurant we could build. It was in fact a restaurant that just went bankrupt. So they didn't need any money. So we said, okay, we buy the whole interior and build it one-to-one into a bar downstairs. But within the same situation where just half a year ago, people would order number 7 chop suey or something. So so that was the project. That project became then a very rather successful project. It's one of the most popular Chinese restaurants in Austria. I pulled out later. But then the restaurant grew and grew, and they opened more spaces. My brother, sometimes I consult them, and it's today one of the biggest Chinese companies of restaurant in Austria.
So these are Civil War portraits, let's call them, that I reenacted, but I restaged. But the subjects are Civil War portraits, which were white and black soldiers. I began to create a revision of history as portrayed in the mass mediums of film and television. I decided to create fictional Civil War portraits using young Asian males as subjects. Since working on film shoots in the 1970s in Hollywood, I have been fascinated by the costume collection held by Western Costume, Hollywood's oldest costume house. I discovered that Western Costume's collection dates back to 1912, the beginning of cinematic history, in a way, and includes Civil War uniforms used in D.W. Griffith's infamous film, Birth of a Nation. I wanted to expand the living archive of faces to include vulnerable yet proud young Asian males excluded from the United States historical birth of photography. So I was really sort of interested that they had these, uniforms from this film, this horrible film that resurrected the KKK in the United States. And so the the conceit is that perhaps part or one of these uniforms were actually in the film. As I researched the historical record, I discovered to my surprise that there were indeed soldiers of Asian descent in both the armies of the North and the South during the Civil War. I realized that once again, people of various racial backgrounds had been systematically excluded from the national record, even by recent revisionist history. So I would say that probably most of the Civil War soldiers that participated were of Asian descent were, of course, Chinese. They were brought over to build their railroads and things like this. Okay, so now we're going to move into this newer piece that I did in Taiwan, exactly. And so, I want you later to talk about Taiwan and China a little bit, because I think that maybe people don't know the situation, between China and Taiwan at this moment. Okay, so before, it's sort of a weird picture, right? It's weird. Before Twitter ushered in, before Twitter ushered in the Arab Spring and Facebook enabled political dissent in mainland China, early Enka music was a force, that's the name of this genre of music in Japan, was a force for social change. Surprisingly, Enka, which means speech song, was first introduced as a form of oral communication to make political ideas more accessible to the public, as well as to avert police interference. Most recently, the audience for Enka songs has been older people, a musical vestige of a colonial Japanese past in Taiwan. Enka lyrics are rife with love lost and general feeling of melancholy. The new Enka songs I invited four Taiwanese artists to compose new political lyrics to old Enka standards. This is in Taiwan. The new adaptation of Enka explores the multicultural range of influences which make up the culture of Taiwan. So when I first went to Taiwan, which was relatively recently, maybe 10 years ago, I went to these sites, these central sites of the occupation by Japan. Japan occupied Taiwan for many, many years, maybe 40 years, 60 years. And so it really had this indelible sort of influence on the culture and its food and many things. But I was surprised that when I got into a cab to go to these places, these hot springs and places like this, that they would play this music that was familiar to me, but it was, of course, in Taiwanese. And so I said, well, what is this music? And they said, well, it's Taiwanese music. But of course, it's a leftover, a vestige of the occupation. And so I thought, wow, this still exists here. And of course, in Japan, it still exists too. It's sort of like country and western in the United States. It takes that role. But, of course, it's not political at all anymore. But so I thought, since the origins of these Enka songs in Japan were political, in that when Japan was turning over to a parliamentary form of government, the younger candidates could not give speeches. So they had to sing their speeches, their political speeches. So that's the beginning of Enka. So I thought, well, I'll ask Taiwanese artists to write contemporary political lyrics to a familiar Enka melody. So it's a little convoluted, but anyway, that's what I did. So let's see if I could, okay, that's not the right one. Okay, so we'll go to this now. 无法克制说话，加上被明白麻痹，不用担心，请你放心，我的爱，虽然是孤单一人，虽然我还没有出轨。来到他乡的这个首都，但是我真的请开车，慢慢你也会被利用。我的钱
改正统已经过一天，希望会平安过日。想到我要听的卡车，想到我要红的浪花。我也来到他乡的这个首都，如果我会长出头顶，妈妈你也会被利用。要注意激烈竞争，小心厉害啦！请保重，不可伤风，我的爱。我一片太在浪跑，我已经更多爬层。我也来到他乡的这个首都，我一定会成功。妈妈，你也会被利用。
So anyway, the performer is Betty Apple, and she is a well-known. I'm not going to show this piece, but I don't know what happened to my text, but so she's a performance artist in Taiwan and in Taipei, and so I asked these performance artists to perform the songs, and so the melody is about. It's like "Mom, be careful" or something like that. So it's a very manipulative sort of commercial Enka song.